I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States
the office of President of the United States
and will to
The inauguration, we thought, was a time of celebration, rededication, a time of pleasure, a reminder of what our nation is, what it could be. And we were pleased with the way it turned out.
It does point out that in the United States, we can have a transition from one person of one political party to another person of another political party in an orderly, constitutional way.
Under the direction of Jack Watson, who was my transition leader, we delved as deeply as possible into the existing government. And I have to say that President Ford was remarkably cooperative. He helped in every way possible.
The change from one administration to another happens almost instantly, in the few seconds required to take the presidential oath of office. But the change really begins much earlier and takes much longer. In the months between winning the election and assuming the office, the new president has much to learn and much to do. And one of the most important things is to attract the best possible people to the important responsibilities of public service and government. It was my pleasure as mayor of Atlanta to welcome the Democratic National Convention here in July. But as important and exciting and successful as the convention was, there was plenty going on that wasn't at the Omni, and much of it went on here at the Carter Center and Jimmy Carter Library. The Saturday before the convention opened, this hall was packed with nearly 1,000 of the best-known and well-respected journalists and political writers from all over the world. And literally over it all was the founding credo enunciated by President Jimmy Carter: I want the Carter Presidential Center to be a great resource for the people of Georgia, the nation, and the world, and an expression of my gratitude for having been able to serve. I know the truth of that statement. It was my privilege and honor to serve President Carter as ambassador to the United Nations.
On Sunday, July 17th, the Carter Presidential Center hosted two more gatherings. Chairman Paul Kirk and the Democratic National Finance Committee met, and the Speaker of the House, Jim Wright, and Mrs. Wright were hosts for an afternoon reception.
It was also my privilege to be in the rotunda of the Carter Center on the day the convention opened, in very distinguished company.
The gathering was honored by the presence of Governor Michael Dukakis and the Reverend Jesse Jackson.
My vocation is public service, and I am proud of it. I am proud of it. And as I look around these rooms, I am looking at a lot of great and dedicated and fine public servants, and I hope you are proud of it as well. And I'm particularly honored to be in the presence of a great many of you who have made and continue to make public service an honorable, an important, and a very, very valuable profession. Mr. President, thank you very much. Mrs. Carter, thank you for having us.
But it gave many of us a chance to grow. And in some sense, that's what the public service mandate is about, a chance to grow. A system where everybody has royal blood. You can go from slave ship to championship. You can go from peanut planter to president, or from log cabin to White House. That's what public service and democracy is about, letting the common people grow according to their ambition, their will to work, and their character. President Carter allowed people to grow.
We were here that day to honor the tradition of public service and the men and women who have rendered public service with the introduction of a half-hour documentary.
I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear
That I will faithfully execute
the office of the President
of the United States.
and will, to the best of my ability,
Preserve and protect and defend the Constitution of the United States.
so help me God.
Entitled The Presidential Inauguration, the film is part of this exhibition presented by the Carter Inaugural Trust and organized by Dr. Donald Shavey, director of the Carter Library. Over the next several years, this exhibition will travel to the other 7 presidential libraries and the National Archives in Washington.
I'm sure that you all know that inaugurations are financed by privately raised funds. And back in 1977, we had a better than balanced budget. We had some money left over, and we put it into a trust for the purpose of promoting public participation in inaugurations. If you'll remember, that's what Jimmy and I tried to do with our inauguration, just include as much of the public as we could. Well, during the last 2 inaugurations, we have made contributions to the Smithsonian Museum so they could stay open longer during inauguration week. And then the trustees decided last year that it would be good to commission a documentary on inaugurations and to describe the history of inaugurations. And finally, I want to give special recognition and appreciation to a person who is not here today, but a very familiar face and voice, without whose help the film would not have been the special film it is, and that is Walter Cronkite. Walter was committed to the project, and as you will see, his skills, his talent made it a very special film. It teaches, it inspires, it causes you to laugh, and it makes you proud to be an American.
The documentary and exhibition are unique. No other presidency has ever established a trust using unspent inaugural funds to encourage and create a greater public participation in the process of the inauguration. In presenting this exhibition and documentary, the Jimmy Carter Inaugural Trust offers literally millions of Americans new insights into the way the American political process works, and works like no other on earth.
The primary thrust of this luncheon is about public service. We won't go back all the way to George Washington, but we're going back several generations of presidents, and have a very brief presentation now to conclude our program from those who knew most about the Democratic presidents who've served in recent history.
When President Jimmy Carter called Philip Klutznick back to public service in his administration, he was drawing on experience and service that began in the Roosevelt era.
He has served with 7 presidents.
It's a privilege to speak to any meeting concerned with public service. I've been very fortunate in my lifetime. I've had all sorts of careers. There isn't any such thing as hands-off service in public life. It's hands-on all the way, and you get a delight when it's possible to go home at night and feel that those hands you had on were clean and you did something you could live with. He was an ideal man to work for. As long as you performed and let him know, you always got his support. And I wish he were back now, and even at 81, I would go back and finish what we didn't finish because it needs doing.
Robert J. Donovan brings a different perspective to the subject of public service. As a member of the Fourth Estate, he observed the presidency of Harry Truman, wrote about it for the Los Angeles Times, and subsequently produced 2 biographies of the man from Missouri.
In the context in which we are thinking in this election year, much can be said about public service under Harry Truman. No one doubts that he was a strong and industrious president. He surrounded himself with an extraordinary group of strong men. To those strong men, the president delegated wide latitude, but he never cut any of them loose to roll around the deck. The strong men worked for a strong president who sat behind a sign on his desk reading, "The buck stops here." The Truman administration produced an outstanding demonstration of public service in the urgent and complex operation of the Marshall Plan. The ideal of public service probably does not reach much higher than George Marshall. It also says something about a president when a man of Marshall's ability and renown willingly makes such sacrifices because the president needs him. The character of the president is a vital element in inspiring true public service.
The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Theodore Sorensen had already answered the call whose eloquence he crafted for President John Kennedy. After 8 years as assistant to Senator Kennedy, he served as special counsel to President Kennedy, and he helped a future president as well.
Fairly early in 1975, I began to wander around the nation looking for hands to shake and microphones to speak into and reporters to listen to what I said. New York was just a big mystery to me, a kind of an alien environment. And it was hard for me to find a place on which I could lay my head. But I found one friend there who said, "You can come to our house. We don't have a bed for you to sleep in, but Gillian and I will let you come to our house if you sleep on a couch," which was a very uncomfortable couch. I hope they've changed it, "on the front porch of our home." And that was Ted Sorensen. All of us who are interested in eloquence, all of us who are interested in inspiration, in words that are memorable, can only be impressed by what Ted Sorensen did as a close associate of John F. Kennedy.
It's a daunting prospect to speak on the same program with Jimmy Carter, Mike Dukakis, and Jesse Jackson. Jack Kennedy could have handled it easily, but he had a much better speechwriter than I do. He believed that one man can make a difference, that government can make a difference, that government is no better than the men and women who compose it, that America's most important business, to use his words, is the public business, and that the public service should be a proud and lively career. And he asked business and professional men to give up their comfortable lives and comfortable income in order to serve their country. It was not Camelot. We were not free from error or flaw, but it was a remarkably dedicated group of public servants serving a man remarkably dedicated to public service.
Harry C. McPherson, Jr. was special counsel to President Lyndon Johnson. He had served the president when Johnson was Senate Majority Leader and returned to the West Wing during the Carter years as a member of the Outside Insiders weekly meeting.
And Harry McPherson then was an inspiration and a practical helper to me, and his service has been great for all Americans.
For Johnson and the generation of politicians who got their start in the Depression and the Roosevelt era, public service was the expected thing. It was the career you worked for because nothing else could hold a candle to it. Johnson performed, you remember when you think of public service and Lyndon Johnson, you may well think, because many of you probably had this happen to you, of arm twisting, getting your arm twisted to perform public service. He did that with zest and with a great deal of confidence because he figured that the twistee really wanted to serve. He just had to have it pointed out to him. Here was the quintessential political operator, Lyndon Johnson, a political fundraiser who knew a lot of untold and untellable things about a lot of people. A deal maker, a promoter, anything but a saint. And yet his administration was virtually without scandal. It was without tawdriness. Its president revered government's purposes and activities, its abilities to help people, though he had a skeptical view of human perfectibility, which is probably one reason why he got by without scandal and tawdriness.
Ted Sorensen worked for John Kennedy. So did Esther Peterson. Harry McPherson worked for Lyndon Johnson. So did Esther Peterson. Philip Klutznick worked for Jimmy Carter. So did Esther Peterson, serving as Jimmy Carter's special assistant on consumer-related matters.
She's a person who arouses the admiration of the world among all those who know her. And she epitomizes to me, as well as anyone who has spoken or been described in the White House, as a wonderful public servant, Esther Peterson.
I don't want to say except, oh my goodness. And I know that I do it from my point of view, but I look back and I think, Esther, why are you so concerned about public service? And I think I go back to know that I was fortunate enough to grow up in Utah in a household where Sunday dinner often meant a discussion what good we had done in the world. And at 81 years of age, I'm still conscious and smitten with that same desire. I'm happy to have had the feeling that most of the activities I have found myself involved in would have qualified for input at the Egerton dining room table. I think it would have. Anyway, and the best of those times, the very best, were spent in the service of the government of the United States, particularly in the White House. The hours were abominable, the pressures intense, the criticisms interminable, and the pay wasn't all that wonderful either.
Harry Truman was right. Finally, the man in this office makes the decisions and has to live with their consequences. This may very well be the loneliest job in the world. But down through the years, there have been men and women of honor and dedication who have helped their presidents come to just and humane and honorable conclusions. Men and women who filled cabinet posts and who served as senior advisors to the president.
Well, I think you probably noticed a remarkable coincidence that the earliest servant here, representing Franklin D. Roosevelt, and the youngest public servant representing me, both 81 years old. This is a remarkable gathering, and I'm deeply grateful that all of you would come.
That night, at the opening session of the Democratic National Convention, President Carter spoke.
And we want to bring back to Washington people who are more interested in public service than they are in private gain. Each of us pauses on occasion to reassess our own lives, to look at what we have become, the mistakes we've made, and to decide what we'd like to be. I think as a nation we make this same kind of reassessment when we elect a president. Now is the time to reconsider our opportunities and our challenges, to make a change, and to decide what we want for the future, especially to decide what we want for the future. A democracy is always an unfinished creation. Each generation must rediscover the meaning of America's dream. Tonight, I'm thinking not only about the next president, but about our nation's children and how they will live in years to come. Roosevelt and I have 6 grandchildren. What kind of world will we leave to them and to other young people? In thinking about the past 8 years and looking ahead, let's recall the words of a great American president, Franklin Roosevelt. Listen to what he said. Governments can err. Presidents do make mistakes. But better the occasional faults of a government that lives in a spirit of charity than the consistent omissions of a government frozen in the ice of its own indifference.
In addition to receptions and meetings, the Carter Center was also the setting for 2 Democratic policy forums during Convention Week. Planned and organized by Charles Knapp, Sidney Topol, and Terry Adamson, the first dealt with human resources, education, and competitiveness. The second considered defense, national security, and foreign policy. On Wednesday afternoon, President and Mrs. Carter and the trustees of the Jimmy Carter Inaugural Trust honored the people who had served during the Carter presidency.
2 centuries have passed since George Washington took the first presidential oath of office, but for all the changes the world has suffered and enjoyed, some things have never changed and never will. The president, for all his power, will need help. The selfless, learned, dedicated work of the common good performed by uncommon individuals.
I can at least say to each of them, as they chart their still uncertain career goals, look for ways in which you can do some good in the world, and you'll have riches undreamed of.
Let every man and woman, he said in January 1961 in his State of the Union address, let every man and woman who works in any area of our national government, in any branch, at any level, be able to say with pride and with honor in future years, I served the United States government in that hour of our nation's need.
As we pause about these tables, O Lord, we're mindful of the distinguished careers representing service over many decades in several administrations. And through these careers, we acknowledge that noble tradition which places public good above private gain. In an era which has tended to elevate self-interest into the common good, we pray that such a tradition as represented here may be restored to its full dignity in the hearts and minds of a new generation and given fresh embodiment in dedicated leadership.